to be repressed.
Wells says, "The men of my new republic will have an ideal, and that will make killing worth the while."
The First World War provided a real hell on earth. But you had to be fit to be sent to fight. One young man rejected by the army was Aldous Huxley, who was blind in one eye. He was sent to teach French at Eton College instead, and among his mocking pupils was George Orwell.
I think Orwell regarded him, like most of the boys, as a bit of a joke. He was an extremely bad teacher. He was so short-sighted he couldn't see them making, I don't think they made those gestures then, but sort of, you know, gestures of that kind, I should think. He was a serious oddball.
Everything conspired to make him possibly seem rather aloof with his reputation for great intellectual distinction. This would confirm the view that he was a remote egghead.
It was Orwell's first year there, a welcome relief from the totalitarian hell of his prep school. While Huxley taught Orwell to appreciate the works of Baudelaire, 300,000 men were dying on the fields of Passchendaele, while Orwell conjugated his verbs. Russia stood on the brink of revolution. The future writings of both men would struggle to reflect the changing world around them. Orwell was reading H.G. Wells avidly, finding it wonderful escapism from the horrors of the real world.
For a boy growing up in the early 1900s, it was a wonderful thing to meet the stories of Mr. Wells. And here was this wonderful man talking about the inhabitants of the planets in the bottom of the sea. And above all, he knew that the future would not be what respectable people expected.
Even at Eton, the most exclusive school in the country, there were strong class divisions. Satirizing class would be a key feature of Orwell's novel 1984.
Well, he called himself, with his usual comic accurate irony, a member of the lower upper middle class. That was the upper class without money. So he knew how to tip servants, so he had no tips. He knew how to ride, though they had no horses. He knew how to shoot, but they had no guns.
Huxley was reading Wells too, but he hated it. He decided to write an anti-Wellsian work of science fiction. That book would be Brave New World, a catalogue of all the things that this young fogey detested about the modern world. Taking on the concerns of the British utopian, sex, class, and controlling the masses.
In this year of stability, after Ford 632, standard men and women in uniform batches, the whole of a small factory staffed with the products of a single egg, the principle of mass production at last applied to biology.
Brave New World is set in the 26th century. It's the ultimate class satire, imagining a world where people are manufactured on a production line, literally being made to order.
Brave New World is primarily interested in biotechnology as means of social control, as means of social shaping.
Production of babies is entirely artificial in laboratories, in hatcheries, and they're deliberately produced in different grades by releasing less oxygen to the brain when it's forming. You can produce either alphas or betas, or gammas, deltas, or epsilons.
The British class system is taken to its logical conclusion with science. Even in the 26th century, no epsilon will get to go to Eton.
At Eton, they alighted on the roof of Upper School. On the opposite side of Schoolyard, the 52 stories of Lupton's Tower gleamed white in the sunshine. Eton is reserved exclusively for upper caste boys and girls.
After being born as an alpha or an epsilon, brainwashing is used to remind each child of their station in life.
Khaki. Oh no, I don't want to play with Delta children.
Huxley invents hypnopedia, a kind of subconscious teaching discovered by accident when a little boy falls asleep with the radio on. While the child was asleep, a broadcast program from London suddenly started to come through.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And the next morning, little Reuben woke up repeating word for word a long lecture by that curious old writer, George Bernard Shaw, who was speaking, according to a well-authenticated tradition, about his own genius.
Few people think more than 2 or 3 times a year, but I have made an international reputation for myself by thinking once or twice a week.
To little Reuben's wink and snigger, this lecture was, of course, perfectly incomprehensible. The principle of sleep teaching, or hypnopedia, had been discovered.
Well, in the 1920s, just before Brave New World was written, radio had become a very important medium. And there was a certain anxiety about the way that radio could be and would be used. In America, the President, Herbert Hoover, said that it was absolutely unthinkable that a medium as powerful as radio should be allowed to fall into the hands of advertisers. Within 2 years, that was exactly what had happened in America.
Like all utopians, Huxley was suspicious of mass culture and worried about the dumbing down effects of the media. His vision of a leisure society gave him the chance to satirize the things he most detested: advertising, cinema, and sexual promiscuity.
Huxley, in writing Brave New World, is obviously writing a comedy. It's full of jokes. It's not intended at the time he writes it as a serious text, although it was, in a sense, rather more accurate than he supposed it could be.
"Take hold of those metal knobs on the arm of your chair," whispered Lenina. "Otherwise you won't get any of the Feely effects." The plot of the film was extremely simple. A few minutes after the oohs and ahs, a duet having been sung and a little love made on that famous bearskin, every hair of which could be separately and distinctly felt. The beta blonde was ravished away, and the bearskin made a final appearance before the last stereoscopic kiss faded into darkness.
Any dystopia or any utopia, they all have to deal with sex. Who is going to sleep with whom, under what circumstances, who gets to have children, how are the children raised, what are the sexual crimes. They've all got this stuff in them.
No, it's a plot. He can't be responsible for all these.
In Brave New World, the worst sexual crime is to be part of a family, and for men and women to have children together.
The good girls are the ones who do their orgies when they're supposed to be doing their orgies. They're socially compliant. You know, they do the orgies, they have the false pregnancy hormones and things, though they can't really get pregnant because babies are grown in bottles.
Huxley regarded it as almost as being another form of consumer activity. It's strangely passionless. And it's said that one of the reasons why Brave New World was so popular in America in the 1950s was that it seemed to people to be advocating a kind of a rather exciting world of guilt-free sex, whereas in fact I think Huxley was trying to say something different.
His heady mix of free love and drugs kept people happy, but with a dark side. One of his cleverest inventions was Soma, a drug uncannily like Prozac.
People were, in a phrase that Huxley used throughout the 1930s, he said, "We're being taught to love our slavery." They willingly agreed to be pushed into line.
Huxley said that Soma had all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol, none of their defects. He drew his inspiration for Soma from his observations on a journey into darkest England, a trip up north to observe mass unemployment during the Depression. Huxley found the whole thing unbearable. He loathed the hard beds, inedible food, and baths round the edges of which are to be found selections from the hairs of all the commercial travelers on the Northern Circuit.
Into each line,
Upper-class squeamishness oozed from his every pore. If that wasn't bad enough, he then had the misfortune to meet some unemployed miners.
I'm sure no ghost could be as terrifying as these spectres of flesh and blood who walk the streets of our northern cities. Dead men hopelessly resigned to death.
One could wish they were less resigned, less dumbly patient, but the dole has taken the violence out of their despair. Huxley turned the welfare state into soma because he believed that in the future, people would be controlled not by handouts, but by pleasure. When Brave New World was published in 1933, this already seemed over-optimistic. Most thought pain was far more likely to be the measure of control. George Orwell summed it up. Brave New World was a good caricature of the hedonistic utopia, the kind of thing that seemed possible and even imminent, but it had no relation to the actual future.